So you are using the Logic stock compressors and you're wondering, which one do you use on your vocals? Which one do you use on your guitars? And so on. Does it even really matter? Well, I'm gonna make this really short and simple for you because I see a lot of long videos on this topic and you just want the quick answer. Well, first of all, you should know that FET compressors have been historically used on every type of track. Vocals, drums, bass, basically every instrument. They are very fast acting compressors, which makes them great for everything. Optical compressors are typically used on vocals and guitars, but they have some drawbacks as well as some upsides. VCA compressors are typically used on groups of instruments like your drum bus or your mix bus. But when using the Logic compressors, do we have to follow these rules? In most cases here, the answer is no. You can use any of these on any track and get great results, and let me tell you why. All of Logic's compression algorithms try to emulate the tone of a few popular hardware units out there, but the controls are completely different. Let me give you an example of this, but first, if you need help dialing in the compressors on your tracks, or maybe you need help with your mixes in general, make sure and download my home studio mix guide in the description. I made this specifically to help out engineers like you, and it is free to download. This guide has all the EQ and compression starting points for most of the tracks in your mix and is a great cheat sheet if you're struggling with your mixes. So let's take Logic's optical compressor for example. This is an emulation of an LA2A. If we look at another plug-in emulation of this compressor, we can see that it only has two knobs, gain and peak reduction. And this is because it's an older style compressor and works a little differently. And it literally uses light to determine things like attack and release. But if we look at the Logic compressor, we can see that we have far more control over the compressor settings. So an actual LA2A might not be a good choice for your master bus because the attack and release is so slow. But the Logic emulation would be just fine due to the control we have over this compressor. Again, it's only the tone that Logic is trying to emulate. Let's take Logic's FET compressors for example. Logic's Studio FET is their emulation of the Blackface 1176. And Logic's Vintage FET is their emulation of the Blueface 1176 that has a warmer and more saturated tone. But again, if we look at other plug-in emulations of this compressor, we can see that there's no threshold dial. We have a few ratio buttons and there is attack and release knobs, but there's no mention of milliseconds anywhere. The slowest attack time on an actual hardware unit is probably somewhere around 1 millisecond. But again, in the Logic versions, you can see that we can go much higher than that. In short, all of these compressors can really be used on any track due to the fact that we can get so granular with their compression settings. Try dialing some compression in on a track and then just switch back and forth between the different emulations to see what you like the most. It's also worth noting that the Logic Platinum compressor is their own plain vanilla algorithm. So this is gonna be your most transparent and clean tone. And that's no fun, so I would really never use this compressor. And if I was actually using these compressors in my mixes, I would be using the Vintage FET on most all my tracks, and then I'd be using the Vintage VCA for groups of tracks. And I might throw in the Opto compressor here and there for slightly more saturated tones. That's just my preference and you can decide what sounds good to you. Now, if you're using the Logic stock plugins for your vocal chains and are wondering what the order of the plugins should be, I have a super helpful video for you on that, so stick around to check that out. Hey guys, if you like this video, make sure and go grab a copy of my home studio mix guide with your go-to EQ and compression settings for all your tracks, and also go ahead and register for my online mix training that I hold a couple times a week so that you can learn how to turn your home recorded tracks into a professional product.